On New Year's Eve, my mother said, "You'll take the kids overnight. We have plans." My sister smirked. "We already told them." I just nodded. That night they showed up with the kids, but I didn't let anyone in. On the door was a note. But when they checked their bank alerts, that's when they really panicked. I'd been the family babysitter for 5 years straight. Never officially, of course. No one asked? It was just expected. Birthdays, anniversaries, work events, beach trips. If my sister had plans, the kids were dropped off at my place. If my parents had dinner reservations or some weekend getaway, they'd call last minute and say we're bringing the kids. Always like it was doing me a favor. No money. No heads up. No respect. Just this unspoken assumption that I'd always say yes. And for 5 years I did. Because I love my niece and nephew. I really do. But love shouldn't be exploited like that. It had gotten to the point where even my own kids would ask, "Are they coming again this weekend?" Like we were just the backup family. This year, I finally decided things would change. It started with a quiet conversation with my wife in early December. She'd had enough too. We never had holidays to ourselves, never a weekend where we could just be a family without sudden guests under our roof. We both agreed, no more guilt-tripping, no more last-minute dumping. So when New Year's Eve rolled around and my mom said those words, "You'll take the kids overnight, we have plans," it wasn't even a question. It was a command. My sister was standing behind her, smirking. "We already told them," she added, like it was all settled. I just nodded. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just nodded. That afternoon, I made one change to the house. I took a piece of paper, scribbled a few words, and taped it to the front door. "Be serious, not clowns." And then we waited. At exactly 7:43 p.m., their car pulled into the driveway. My wife was upstairs helping our kids get into pajamas. We were planning a movie night, popcorn, hot cocoa, the works. I stayed by the window, watched as they opened the doors. 2 kids hopped out, my niece 8, and my nephew 10. They were carrying backpacks. My sister and mom didn't even bother walking them up to the door at first. Just waved and yelled something, assuming I'd open up. But I didn't. I waited. When they got to the porch, they saw the note. That's when the knocking started. Then the shouting. First my mom. Then my sister. I didn't move. My kids got nervous. My daughter asked if something was wrong. I said no, we were just not answering the door. Eventually, the yelling stopped. I watched from the hallway as my mom took out her phone, probably to call me. I let it ring. Then my sister tried. Then texted. None of them saw what was coming. Because 10 minutes later, while they were fuming on the porch, both of their phones pinged. I know this because I watched my sister's face twist like she'd seen a ghost. They'd finally checked their bank alerts. The joint account. The one I opened years ago when they insisted we all contribute for the kids' school expenses, emergencies, and family needs. Only, I was the only one contributing. Always me. Thousands over the years. What they didn't know was that legally, it was mine. Set up under my name. They'd been using my goodwill and my money while mocking me behind my back. But on December 30th, I pulled every last dollar out. When they saw the balance, $0, that's when they really panicked. And the night hadn't even begun. They stood outside for maybe 20 minutes. First the knocking. Then the shouting. My mom called me 5 times in a row. My sister sent texts like, "Are you serious? What the hell is this?" And, "You better open up." I didn't answer. I didn't even look at my phone after a while. My wife and I were sitting with our kids, watching a movie, trying to keep it normal. And then it got quiet. Not the good kind. The kind that makes you pay attention. I walked past the window again, just in time to see my mom and sister walking back to the car, without the kids. The 2 of them got in and drove away. They left them. They actually left 2 kids standing on my porch in 30-degree weather, carrying backpacks and wearing hoodies like it was October. No coat. No explanation. No backup plan. My wife just said, "Are they serious?" I opened the door, pulled them in, and locked it behind them. They didn't say anything, just stood there looking stunned. My niece had tears on her cheeks and a glittery party hat half crushed in her hand. I didn't ask questions. I told them to come inside, take off their shoes, and go sit on the couch with the other kids. We gave them cocoa and started the movie over. We didn't hear from anyone the rest of the night. That's when I knew this wasn't just about using me as a babysitter. This was something darker. There wasn't even a text to ask if the kids were okay. No. Thanks. No. Sorry. Not even fake concern. They were punishing me. Not by confronting me, but by discarding the kids like trash, thinking that would teach me a lesson. At midnight, we toasted with sparkling cider. My kids and my niece and nephew all fell asleep in the living room together under a pile of blankets. I sat next to my wife and tried to act like everything was fine. But it wasn't. Something was off. It didn't feel like a family disagreement anymore. It felt like cruelty. At 1:47 a.m. my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number at first. It was my nephew. The younger one. Whispering. He sounded scared. I could barely hear him at first, but then it clicked. He was at home. I asked him why he wasn't here. He said they never stayed. After we didn't answer the door, my mom and sister told them to wait on the porch for a bit. And we'll be back. That was over 4 hours ago. I told him to go unlock the door and wait for me. I was already putting my shoes on. My wife didn't even ask where I was going. She just said, "Be careful." Their house was pitch black when I pulled up. The front door was cracked open. Lights off. Silence. When I stepped inside, I found the kids curled up on the couch with a dead phone between them. No food. No water. Just 2 children left in a cold, empty house with a note on the fridge that said, "Don't touch anything." I brought them back with me, wrapped them in blankets, tucked them in next to my kids. They didn't say anything. They were exhausted and scared. I could tell they didn't understand what was happening, why no one was looking for them. The next morning, I tried calling my mom. Straight to voicemail. Same with my sister. I texted both of them, told them exactly where the kids were and when I picked them up. Still nothing. No reply. No questions. Just silence. Finally, around noon, my mom texted back. "You betrayed us." That's all it said. Not, "Thank you." Not, "Are they safe?" Not even, "Why did you take them?" Just blame. As if I was the one who did something awful. I stared at it for a long time. Then I showed it to my wife. She didn't say anything. She just shook her head and said, "Then they haven't seen betrayal yet." And she was right. I didn't hear from them all that day. My wife kept asking if I wanted to call again, just to check in. I said no. I wanted to see how far they take it, how long they could go without asking where their children were. It had already been over 12 hours. Around 6 p.m., I checked the security camera I'd installed at their place a while back, mostly for the kids' safety. They never knew it was there. Motion sensor triggered. Someone had been by, looked like my mom, stayed about 2 minutes then left. Never even went inside. The front door was still cracked open when she showed up. And still cracked open when she left. She didn't even close it. That night, my wife and I gave the kids dinner, let them pick the movie, and let them stay up late again. I could tell they didn't want to go back. No one said it out loud, but they were calmer here. Laughing. Eating without being told to stop. Not walking on eggshells. My niece whispered to my daughter at one point, "I like it better here." Next morning, 7:38 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. It was their dad. My sister's ex-husband. I hadn't spoken to him in almost a year. He sounded like he'd been driving all night. He said, "I heard what happened. Are they with you?" Turns out, one of the kids had called him using my wife's phone. Just to say hi. They hadn't seen him in 9 months. Not since the custody battle. My sister blocked his number from their devices, told them he moved on and didn't want to talk. But he'd been trying. He sent money every month, called every week, wrote letters that were never passed on. And now, after hearing what had happened, that his kids were left alone in an empty house on New Year's Eve, he got in his car and started driving from 3 states away. He didn't even wait for a lawyer. He just came. I told him they were safe. That we had them. That they weren't going anywhere. When I hung up, I felt something shift. Like we were about to cross a line you can't come back from. Because now it wasn't just me involved. It wasn't just about disrespect, or manipulation, or being used. It was about custody. Neglect. Actual child endangerment. And I was the one holding the line. That afternoon, my mom and sister finally showed up. They came storming up the porch, furious, pounding on the door again like nothing had happened. I opened it just a few inches. My sister yelled, "Where are my kids?" I said, "Safe. Unlike when you left them home alone for an entire night." She tried to push her way inside, but my wife was already there, blocking the doorway. She told them both to back off. Said they weren't taking anyone. My mom started her usual lecture, about how families stick together, about loyalty, about how I had no right. My wife cut her off cold. She said, "You left 2 children alone and walked away like they didn't exist. Don't talk to me about loyalty." They both started yelling over each other, trying to make it about me, about betrayal, about how I'd always held this grudge. I didn't say anything. I was done explaining myself. Eventually, my wife slammed the door in their faces. They stood outside for a few minutes, screaming, threatening to call someone, saying lawyers would be involved. Then they left. And they still didn't ask to see the kids. That night I sat with my nephew on the couch. He asked me, "Is my dad really coming?" I told him yes. And I wasn't lying. That night had a weird stillness to it. Not quiet in the peaceful sense, more like that calm right before a storm hits. My wife and I were both on edge. The kids were playing with board games on the floor, laughing like nothing happened. But it didn't feel real. Everything felt too still. Around 9:15 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was their dad again. He said he'd crossed into our state and was about an hour and a half out. He'd driven nearly 11 hours straight, only stopping for gas. When I asked if he wanted to crash for the night, he just said, "Not yet. First, I need to see them." At exactly 11:03 p.m., his car pulled into our driveway. I watched from the window as he got out. He didn't even close the car door. My niece and nephew had already spotted him and ran barefoot down the front steps into the yard. He dropped to his knees and hugged them both like it was oxygen. I hadn't seen that look on his face since before the divorce. Back when they were still doing weekends at his place. Back before my sister poisoned the whole setup. After they came inside, we got them warm and tucked them in with our kids. Then, while my wife stayed upstairs, he and I sat down at the kitchen table. He looked wrecked, clothes wrinkled, face drawn, but his eyes were clear. Focused. He opened his backpack and slid a manila folder across the table. Said, "You should see this." Inside were over 20 letters. Birthday cards, hand-drawn pictures, personal notes. All addressed to his kids. All unopened. Some marked, "Return to sender." One of them had, "Do not give her this," written in my sister's handwriting right on the envelope. He showed me screenshots of money transfers. Not child support, separate. Gifts, grocery help, new clothes. Every single one sent to my mom or my sister. No receipts. No thanks. Just silence. And then came the real shock, a notarized affidavit from his lawyer. Dated 4 days before New Year's Eve. It was a petition for emergency custody, signed and sealed, but never filed, until that morning. He hadn't even planned to use it unless something serious happened. He was still trying to believe they'd work something out. Then he got a call, not from me. From his old neighbor in the next town over. Someone who still followed my sister on social media. Apparently, she posted a photo on New Year's Eve, a blurry group shot in a bar, everyone drunk, champagne in the air. Caption said, "No kids, no drama, finally free for the night." That's when he knew. I asked him what he wanted to do next. He didn't hesitate. Said, "I'm taking them with me. Permanently." And then he dropped another bomb. He told me CPS had been investigating my sister for months, off-the-record stuff. A school counselor had filed a report after my niece came to school with a hand-shaped bruise on her arm and said she got in trouble for using the microwave. But my mom had smoothed things over. Said it was a misunderstanding. Said my sister was just stressed. Apparently, that wasn't the first report. But now, after what happened on New Year's Eve, after she left the kids home alone, after I picked them up, after they were never even reported missing, the entire thing got kicked into high gear. His lawyer submitted everything that morning, my texts, screenshots, photos of the door wide open, timestamps, footage from the camera I'd installed last year. By the time we finished talking, it was nearly 2 a.m. He crashed on our couch, said he wasn't taking any chances with hotels. That night I couldn't sleep. Kept replaying everything. The door. The phone call. The silence from my family. It was like they'd all snapped at once. The next morning, just after 10 a.m., we got a text from my sister. "You're going to regret what you've done. This is war." 2 hours later, she came home to flashing lights and 2 officers on her porch. A social worker was already inside. Her kids were with us. Her ex had the custody papers in hand. And the house she'd left wide open on New Year's Eve. Yeah. The neighbors had reported it too. She hadn't just lost a babysitter. She'd lost her cover. She showed up at my door exactly 3 hours later. No warning. No text. Nothing. Just her, standing there like a storm in human form. My mom was right behind her, arms crossed, jaw tight like she thought that made her look powerful. They didn't knock. They just stood there, waiting. I opened the door and stepped out, closing it behind me. I didn't want the kids to hear any of it. My sister didn't ask about her children. Not once. She didn't ask if they were safe, if they were fed, if they'd cried themselves to sleep the past few nights. She didn't ask how they felt seeing their dad for the first time in 9 months. She didn't ask anything real. Instead, she said, "You went behind my back and stole my kids." I told her the truth, that I didn't steal anyone. I picked them up because she left them alone in an unlocked house overnight, and I kept them safe because she didn't come back. That wasn't betrayal. That was basic human decency. She didn't want to hear it. She was too far gone. My mom tried to step in, started to blame my wife, said she was the one whispering in my ear, turning me against family. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was pathetic. My wife was the only one in this entire mess who hadn't abandoned those kids. They kept going, tag-teaming me like they always did. Talking fast, accusing me of betrayal, manipulation, turning the kids against them. All while standing on my porch, outside a house they once treated like a dumping ground. But then my sister said something that stopped everything. She said, "You think you're the hero, but they're mine. You don't get to decide where they go." That's when the door behind me opened. And there stood their father, holding a legal document. His voice calm. Eyes direct. He said, "Actually, the court does. And they already did." She froze. He handed her the order, signed, official, effective immediately. Full emergency custody granted. Visitation suspended pending further review. Her face went pale. My mom tried to grab it out of her hands to read it, but he held firm. Said, "You'll get your copy. With your lawyer." And then, right there on my porch, my sister snapped. She lunged forward and tried to push past me into the house, screaming that we had no right. That she was going to get the kids. That she'd drag us all down. But she didn't make it 2 steps. My wife was already behind the door, calling the cops. And within 10 minutes they were back, the same officers from earlier. This time with a copy of the restraining order her ex had filed just hours before, now activated after her outburst. She was told to leave the property. My mom tried to argue, but they weren't listening anymore. This wasn't a family dispute. This was legal. The officers walked them both to their car. My mom turned back, gave me a look like I'd stabbed her in the back. But she didn't say anything. I didn't say anything either. Because what do you even say to people who left 2 children in an empty house on a holiday night, then came back more angry about losing control than losing their kids? That evening, we sat around the dinner table with 4 kids and 2 adults who had finally done the right thing. The kids were quiet at first, then hungry. Then silly. Then tired. Like any normal children in a safe place. Later that night, I caught my nephew standing in the hallway, just outside the room where his dad was unpacking his suitcase. I asked if he was okay. He nodded. Then he whispered, "He's really staying?" I said yes. But what I didn't say, what I couldn't say, was this. "And they're not coming back." The days that followed were strange, a mix of relief, quiet, and this lingering sense that something was still unfinished. Like we'd stepped off a roller coaster, but the adrenaline hadn't worn off yet. The kids stayed with us the whole time. Their dad didn't want to rush them. He wanted to ease them into the move, let them feel it wasn't just a rescue, it was a beginning. He was a different man than I remembered. Steady. Focused. Not the broken guy my sister used to describe when she needed sympathy points. The version of him she fed us back then? It was a lie, a narrative designed to make her look like the victim. But the truth was simple: he'd always been trying to stay connected. She just never let him. In those last few days before they left, I found myself watching the kids more closely. How they acted when no one was giving orders. When they weren't tiptoeing around moods. When there wasn't a timer on how long they could laugh. They changed. Even in just a week. My niece asked if she could paint her nails. My nephew asked if he could sleep in until 10. These were kids getting permission to be kids. One night, while everyone was asleep, I caught their dad sitting at our kitchen table, looking through a small envelope. Inside were drawings they'd made for him. Ones he'd never seen before. Ones he'd mailed in letters that had been returned, unopened. He just sat there for a while, flipping through them like they were artifacts. That night, I realized something else. I hadn't just been babysitting these kids for 5 years. I'd been shielding them. Keeping the damage at bay. Patching over what their own mother refused to acknowledge. But shielding isn't the same as saving. And that was something only their father could do now. 3 days later, the courts signed off on everything. Emergency custody became full custody. The kids were officially going home with their dad. My sister didn't fight it. She didn't even show up to the final hearing. My mom was listed as uninvolved in the filing, which still makes me laugh. The night before they left, we let them pick the dinner. Pizza, ice cream, and waffles, all at once. We put on a movie, built a blanket fort, and let them stay up as long as they wanted. My daughter fell asleep with her head on my niece's lap. My son and nephew both conked out halfway through the movie. It felt like a goodbye party disguised as a sleepover. The next morning, their dad packed the car. We helped them load their new clothes, their toys, their drawings. Not the backpacks they used to come with. Real bags. Real stuff. Their stuff. My niece hugged me hard. Then stepped back and said, "I didn't think grown-ups could fix things like this." My nephew said, "You didn't let them leave us." No. I didn't. I just couldn't. Their dad thanked us a dozen times. Then drove off slow, waving through the window, kids smiling in the backseat like the weight had finally lifted. That night I got a text from him. A photo of the kids asleep in their new beds, in their new home, with night lights glowing and books on their pillows. The caption just said, "Safe." We haven't heard from my sister since. My mom sent one more text, just 2 words. "You'll see." That was it. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just one last little threat, like she still believed we were in some twisted power game. But she doesn't get it. This wasn't about power. Or winning. It was about children. And what they deserve. No more broken promises. No more abandoned porches. No more family guilt disguised as love. This was the clean break. The line that couldn't be crossed again. And maybe, finally, the start of something better for those kids. Because on that cold, cracked New Year's Eve, when they knocked on my door, thinking they could drop their mess off one more time, they didn't just lose control. They lost the lie. And I stopped being their cleanup crew for good.